Hi, I'm Carrie Lee Merritt, and welcome to part 2 of Meritocracy here with Dr. Sara Patenaude. And we're talking today about a range of topics, but I wanted to actually start with how I met you. It was through an organization called Hate-Free Decatur. We were both towards the end of our PhD journeys, I believe, and working in kind of anti-racism, grassroots organizing in our same city here of Decatur. And one of the issues that really brought us together is the Confederate monument in front of our courthouse.
Yes.
And so you were instrumental in getting all of this changed, along with the NAACP local chapters here. And can you just give a little bit of background to this particular issue here?
Sure. Well, you're the expert on the history of the Confederate monument, but to give it a little bit of background, in 1908, the Agnes Lee chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy put up a 30-foot obelisk in Decatur Square. They put it right in front of the DeKalb County Courthouse. And so we know, as with all of these Confederate monuments, that these were not about celebrating the people who fought during the Civil War. It was really about sending a message during the Jim Crow South, about, a warning to Black people in DeKalb County. So that monument's been standing there since 1908. And after the riots in Charlottesville and the death of Heather Heyer, there was this really grassroots swell of people who were ready to see that go. So Hate-Free Decatur formed around the efforts to remove the Confederate monument. And it was really through partnership with a number of organizations, especially Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights, based in the city of Decatur, that we put a lot of pressure on the city and the county. The county did eventually, so the county owns the monument, even though it's in the city of Decatur, but the county did eventually vote to remove the monument, but didn't do anything to make that happen.
Right.
And in the intervening 2 years, while we in our organizations have been trying to find a new place to put the monument, unfortunately there was a new law that passed in the last legislative session that makes that much harder. And it basically says you can never remove or relocate a monument for any reason whatsoever.
Or even cover it. I mean, it's basically impossible to get rid of it. And if you do anything, then you're liable for all sorts of different charges.
Absolutely.
Both in the civil courts and in criminal court. And one of the things I wanted to mention, though, is that part of the way that I think you helped so brilliantly figure out for us to convince essentially the Board of Commissioners to remove the Confederate monument was to have basically a public forum with a bunch of historians who actually know the history of Atlanta, know the history of Confederate monuments, of the Confederacy, of the lost cause myth, the memories of it. And we had a panel of 5 historians that spoke, and I think it really did change some people's minds.
I think so, and I want to say too, that monument panel, it was on a Monday night in the rain, and we still had about 300 people that showed up. So people are hungry for history knowledge. They want to understand what's going on, and I think it's the role of historians to be out there in the public eye, using our knowledge and disseminating that so people can help make informed decisions.
Right. And so the most recent development that's just been making the rounds in the media world is that we basically got the compromise that we've reached right now is to put a marker right next to the Confederate monument that contextualizes it to some extent.
It does, and I will say, so the marker calls the monument a white supremacist symbol. It does tell that this was put up in 1908 by the Daughters of the Confederacy, that it was a Jim Crow act, and that it was about Black intimidation.
Right.
So I do support that, and our organization supports the fact that we need to tell that truer history. We still, as Hate-Free Decatur, think that that monument needs to be moved off the square.
Yes.
In fact, I think that it would be wonderful to just have that marker there saying there used to be a monument here, and we as a society have moved on from supporting these symbols of traitors and are no longer willing to have them in our public squares.
Right. Man, that's something I can get behind. I still will stand behind my statements, though, at that initial meeting where when I was asked what I would do about it personally, I said, tear them all down and dance in the rubble. And I think that, again, that would be a healing act for so many people, really cathartic. But so 1908, it was actually commissioned in 1906. And 1906, as anyone from Atlanta knows, was the year of what they call the Atlanta race riots, which was actually a massacre of African Americans. Atlanta was booming at that time. Black business was booming in Atlanta. And there were a whole lot of white people who could not stand how much money Black Atlantans had amassed and just went through their section of town and killed dozens, if not hundreds, of Black Atlantans, slaughtered them, men, women, and children, burned down their businesses, took everything they could, and this monument was put up as a way to commemorate and remind people that white supremacy reigns supreme, not only in Atlanta, but in Decatur and every single one of these places that then kind of commemorated this race riot.
Absolutely. And people talk about this as if it was something that happened in the past and that this monument, is somehow a benign object that doesn't mean anything anymore. But as we saw with the last gubernatorial election, people are still using the same kind of rhetoric. So the 1906 race riots kicked off when a newspaper published a fake account claiming that Black men were raping white women in the city, which, the Southern rape complex is something that we saw repeated over and over and over, this idea that we needed to protect white womanhood from these Black men that were supposedly, sexual monsters. And that actually spurred the governor's race in 1906.
Right.
Now, last year, when we had Stacey Abrams running, we also had Brian Kemp and Casey Cagle running for the gubernatorial primary for the Republican Party. And they used those exact same kind of tactics, where they published fake accounts claiming that, immigrants were coming and doing all of these horrible things. One of the candidates for the Republicans had his deportation bus that he claimed he was going to round up illegals. That these same kinds of patterns are playing out. And that to think that this monument, because it was put up 100 years ago, doesn't mean anything anymore is just absolutely untrue.
Right. So, you heard it here. Let's take down the monuments. We've got to change Georgia law first. There's a slew of lawsuits being fought in courts right now. But I think really in Georgia, nothing, unfortunately, is going to change until we actually get a change of leadership.
Yeah. And we do have a great leader in Renita Shannon. So we have a state senator, Elena Parent, who suggested that we change the law to allow city governments to remove monuments that they own if they wanted to. Renita Shannon, our House representative, went a step further, and I really support what she said. She said that these are monuments to white supremacy, and that we should not be having Black Georgians pay their tax dollars to maintain these monuments. So under her legislation that she introduced last session, these monuments would actually be required to be removed from public land.
Oh, that's brilliant.
If you want to put it on your own piece of land and maintain it with private dollars, that's up to you, but that the state and local governments should not be using Black taxpayer dollars to support these symbols of Black subjugation.
It's a legally brilliant argument. So please, we'll put a link to her proposed legislation so you can go and support it, and maybe there's even a way to donate to candidates who support this as well.
I'm sure she would love to take some donations.
Great. Thank you. Stay tuned for more from Meritocracy.